everybody. Welcome back to the Fractional Forum, where we gather to have conversations about stuff. We're going to be trying, so if you've checked out the Fractional Forum in 2024, we were doing some kind of broad overviews of business challenges and providing a lot of diverse perspectives, which is what we are here to do. But one of the things, we had a group meeting over the holidays, and one of the things we were talking about is like we'd really love to like dive a little deeper into some of these things, and where a lot of business problems are very complex, they're very big, they touch a lot of different departments. So one of the things we're going to be trying out for the beginning of this year is just giving the opportunity for us to go a little deeper. And this also opens up a really great opportunity for those of you in the audience to help us do that with your questions. And so, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's the frame what we're going to do today. And particularly, so one of the things I think is pretty common for businesses and also individuals to do as part of the new year is to look at goals and how maybe we want to achieve those goals, specifically if we haven't historically been able to achieve those goals. So we're going to talk a little bit today about goals, what stops us from getting to reaching the goals, what keeps us in this like continual iteration of doing the same thing but not moving closer to our goals, what role can fractional resources play in that, what role will internal resources play in that, all of the good stuff. And as I mentioned, if you're joining us live, pop your thoughts, perspectives, questions, insights into the comments, because that can also take us in a different direction where, who knows, we might need to go there today. So with that, if you are new, if you are new to the Fractional Forum, what you are looking at here is a bunch of people who like asking questions, who like being curious, who represent different backgrounds that you might experience in a business. So marketing, technology, HR, finance, operations, sales, to get those diverse perspectives. And the fun of that is that we each have our own experience of what it looks like to set goals, what it looks like to reach goals, what it looks like to not reach goals, our own perspectives on why that works, why it doesn't. So we're just gonna jump right into it. Is there anybody who wants to like kick off the conversation on really what we should be talking about when it comes to goals at the end of the day?
I'm happy to go first. So
I was going to say, I feel like Lindsay's always happy to go first.
I know. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm a middle child, so I feel like my whole life conquest is about trying to go first. So I think one thing that I think is super important, and I'll just talk about a specific situation that I am working in currently. So some pretty lofty, big goals for the year. And I don't want to get big into this big, massive, like, you know, all the things you can do. But I think one thing that pops up to me is that goals tend to be about being better or getting more, right? Like, I think those are kind of like the starting points. Like better would be, you know, there's a lot of word goals being thrown around. I know my goal for the year is just trying to be more intentional about my actions and making sure they're aligned. Focus, discipline, there's all sorts of things that have popped up through different social media channels. And I don't know if that's a great way to even start for ourselves and goals. But myself, I was, you know, working with a company, and the CEO was speaking about her goals for the year, and in really like personal, and they were defined, but narrowed down to 2 words. And what I thought she did really, really well was she took those 2 words and then she broke them down into what does that mean. So for one of the words was focus. So what does focus actually mean? So it's saying no more often. That was one example I can think of, but just like willingness to break down a goal versus just have it as a post-it on your wall.
I like the idea as well of having that like theme for the year, like the one word that everyone can rally around, because I feel like sometimes there's these, you know, this buffet of goals that emerges, and sometimes it gets lost in translation. I've seen where there's so many goals that just the rest of the organization can't actually even connect to the different options. So I really like what you said there, Lindsay, around having the one or two words that can be the repeated at the water cooler. Like everyone kind of knows what those themes for the year are, and so I really like that.
I think it's really important that you collaborate and ask that question of what does that word mean to you, and ask the rest of the team for their thoughts too into that. And it's such an important thing with goal setting is the leaders don't have it all figured out. That's why they have a team. That's why they have you there, right? So they might have figured out that focus is the theme for the year and some things that means for them, but the rest of what it means for the organization, that needs to come from everybody. So that's where the collaboration and goal setting is so important, is they all contribute to the buildup of what that goal means for the year ahead.
I think it does have to start with the leader, though. It does have to start with them. Like running a business, building a business is so challenging. And so, it has to be fun. It has to bring joy to that leader, right? And so I always actually like to start with a reflection of what were the frustrations that you had the year prior? How do we try to get rid of those frustrations? What does that look like? And then how do we increase the level of joy? Like, what are the things that really fill your bucket as a leader? And how do we amplify that? So those are the questions that I always like to ask our potential clients, because really the goal in my field is to minimize that chaos, increase confidence, and increase joy for that leader so they can continue to push through and make the right choices to scale and achieve their vision.
What's so cool about this conversation, I was just going to say, is that it's all very like purpose. We haven't talked about increasing top line revenue or profitability or, decreasing churn rate or broadening into a new market. We're starting at kind of like the brass tacks of the purpose. And really it can be your filter, right? So super cool.
And Lindsay, those profit numbers are coming.
But you do need profit still.
The joy and fun is so important. Like, I honestly, when it comes to goal setting, I think it's important. But after working in so many different companies, when it comes to that goal setting, I feel super jaded because you see so many goals, priorities, etc. And I feel like there's a lot of commonality across a lot of different, finance departments. They kind of look the same, where it's, we want to, continue to do what we need to get done, timely, accurate, etc. But we want to do things more efficiently. We want to drive innovation. We want to start introducing AI into the way that we're running our different processes. And there's never a linkage between, there's like these great goals, and then there's never a linkage between the day to day. So you go away to the retreat, you set all these wonderful things, you come back, and there's a whole bunch of fires to be done. So one thing I did years ago, we were doing a strategy session with our finance leadership team. And I think kind of after being so jaded of like seeing that like year after year, like no progress, like what's happening, I had people actually take their number of working hours that were going to be available or working days that were going to be available, translated into Monopoly money, and really said, look, here's how much time you're going to have available. Where are you going to slot it into these different goals and still get done your day-to-day, to kind of be able to identify and say, look, that's great that we have all these aspirational goals, but if you don't have any bandwidth to put time and effort and resources towards it, like, let's not call it a goal. Let's just call it a pipe dream that's not going to be achieved. That's why but there's still value in it, right? But it's like, how do you make it something that is actually going to have people use it and rally around it the rest of the year instead of a one-day offsite that gets ignored.
And I feel
focus, right? Focus is going to help with that. That's one thing, like we chatted about, is if you can only do so much, like taking that focus and really narrowing down, saying no to the things that, aren't as important.
The goal setting is definitely one thing. I think the execution could probably be an episode all on its own. Okay, we've set the goals. Now, what do we do with them? I do want to dive back, and I can't remember who mentioned this. it was a couple, I don't know if they're called episodes or not, but episodes ago, where the idea of kind of using some of the previous decisions, some of the previous information to actually found these goals. Like I feel like everyone has a tendency and kind of gets motivation from goals where they say, okay, we're going to increase our top line revenue. We're picking a random number 2x. We're going to increase our EBITDA or whatever it is. And they just kind of randomly pick these arbitrary goals. They feel a sense of accomplishment because rah, we've set them. But they're not founded in anything from the past. So I don't know if anyone has any experience in it or advice they would give around using some of that past knowledge to actually drive goals rather than just kind of feeling which way the wind's blowing. Or if
I want to.
I was going to say, I would love to hear what Tim has to say about these pipe dream revenue goals that people set, and then they're like, here you go, sales team, make it happen.
Well, there's so many things here. And I just want to connect what Keith said back to what Vered said about reviewing the frustrations and the joy from the last year. But it's also going back and looking at the goals. I just did that for myself. I actually do things a bit different. I set my goals in July when I'm out camping, disconnected from the world. So January, when everybody else is setting goals, I'm kind of using it as a checkpoint. And so the energy around everybody's really helpful for that checkpoint. And I reflected on the last 6 months. I achieved maybe 50%. That's maybe generous of what I wanted to at this point. But I did reflect on what else did I do? What other things came up? And so part of that is back to what Vered said. What are the frustrations? What got in the way? What became more important at the time? And so I think to what you're saying, Keith, is reflecting on the past. A lot of times in organizations, we set goals the same every year. Maybe the number just changes, but it's kind of the same goal. And sometimes there can be frustration of, well, we didn't achieve it last year. Why is this year going to be any different? And so that reflection gives you a chance to go back, okay, why didn't we? What got in the way? But what else did we do? And maybe the goal needs to change. And so
Tim, sorry, go ahead.
To connect what Carolyn was saying about profits, I look at my goals. I got 3 goals. None of them say a dollar figure. None of them say revenue. None of them say profit. However, to achieve them, I need revenue and I need profit. So it comes back to purpose and focus. So I think that's one of the important things with profit and revenue goals is why. Why do we want to grow? Why do we want that number? What are we trying to achieve? And maybe it's shareholder value, maybe it's growth, maybe we want to do something, but the why that number is a key reason to help people rally around. Lindsay, I don't know if I moved off from what you're going to jump in on, but
I wanted to ask you a question because I know we've known each other for a long time, and you talk often about goals. In fact, I think you even want to write a book about your goal setting behaviors, which I think is one of your goals currently.
Yeah.
But I guess I want to understand, and maybe this will help our audience, because I think you are really good at your goal setting and just, past conversations we've had. Why do you set the goals you set? Like, what's your why?
What's my why? Well, I mean, it kind of all came into the thought of this book too, right? Somewhere along the way, I just realized I just want to be a little bit better. And I wrote something in another social media channel yesterday about sometimes that goal is just being better than yesterday. And so I was thinking about going to the gym, and sometimes I set a personal best. Sometimes showing up is better than yesterday. And so kind of having that reflection of what does better mean for me? I'm hitting a milestone birthday this year. I won't say which one, but there's a big milestone birthday this year. And so what I can do at this age is different than I could do at 20. I won't say how long ago 20 was. So better than yesterday just means I'm kind of absorbing some of that change in life too, right? And so that's part of my motivation, Lindsay, is like, I want a little bit more. And And if we kind of step away from business a little bit, my personal goals are all about just being able to do the things that I have left to do on my bucket list. So health is an important one, otherwise I can't do a single one of them. Being able to go and experience a lot of things is travel, and Carolyn, I know you love to travel too, so I'm sure that's a key part of that. And then the third one's actually about the book, and I don't care how many it sells. It's just kind of, if I leave it for my kids, then that's all it is, right? But it's just somewhere along the way, like I said, I've just gotten this desire to be a little bit better and always be moving forward. And I think that's important for organizations as well, is if you're not moving forward, if you're not growing, you're falling behind.
I'd like to jump on what Tim said there about bucket lists, because when we think about the concept of a bucket list, it's like pretty clear and pretty generally accepted that we all have a different bucket list, right? So while many of us might have travel on their bucket list, like personally, Angkor Wat in Cambodia is at the top of my bucket list. That may not be at the top of someone else's bucket list. But, sure, Tim, life goals, bucket list, whatever you want. Personally, I love the concept of bucket list. I like the movie Bucket List, and I like the concept. But like, we all have our own of them, right? But then when we get into a business scenario, we all think we're supposed to set the same goals and set goals the same way. And so while we're living this like really clear individual experience on one side, we're not extrapolating that to a business scenario. So like, what if people took the concept of a bucket list and layered it on top of the business, right? Like, what's your business bucket list?
100%. Like, I actually think that there shouldn't be separation. You are actually building this business for your personal beacon. And so not having that established is an oversight. So what is, like, why are you doing that? What is your North Star personally?
Well, and I think it's just because we don't talk about it like that, right? Yeah. Like we get, there's lots of books who have been, and I'm not saying these books are bad or that the goal setting process is bad or wrong or any of those things, but the company I used to work for used Scaling Up, which I think is like pretty common methodology to use for planning. And it's a good methodology. And it's also like, it's based in like really good learnings, really like human-based stuff. But the human-based stuff gets lost in the process of just like filling in the one-page strategic plan. And then you're like, I did my one-page strategic plan. And this doesn't actually, if you look at the core of that exercise, which is supposed to be the heart of the business, it is about purpose. It is about quote unquote bucket list. It's, I don't know. I feel like there's a whole bunch of directions that we can go from this, but it's one of the things where like, this is the thing I love to do for clients is just like a reframe. They're like, what if we looked at the business, and what if it's not just the owner? What if it's the VP of marketing and the sales rep and all of these things? And we looked at, what is your business bucket list? What would you like to say you did here this year? What if you're a sales rep and you want to be like, you know what? I know we have like so much untapped potential in the market. I want to tap that, right? Like I want to tap that potential. Like, okay, how can we do that? And I think there's a lot more power that's available in those types of conversations than in a lot of the types of quote unquote strategic conversations that I've been a party to as part of goal setting.
I mean, wouldn't you say though, a lot of times goal setting comes out of issues? I mean, maybe not for you, Tim, but a lot of time it can be, right? It's like, what do we need to do where we get where we want to go? So if you think bucket list, that's where you want to go. Tracy, you want to get to Cambodia. I think that's what you said. It's like, what is preventing you from getting there currently? Time?
My son.
Money?
I'll tell you. And it's a good example, actually, Lindsay. So I'm just going to like fill in the gap, is that I want to go to Angkor Wat by myself because my theory is that it is the quietest place on earth. And I don't want to have to shush. Like, no, well, don't ruin it, Baron. I have to experience this for myself. But like that's part of like that's what I'm testing. That's why I want to go there. So I don't want to go with my 6-year-old because I don't want to shush him. And so like that's a me thing. And I might be totally wrong about the quiet thing, as Baron said, and I might be totally wrong. My son might be totally silent when I'm there. I don't know. But this is all based on like my interpretation of how I want to do it. And I think this is another thing that was coming up for me when Tim was speaking, was that like there's not just one way to get to a destination. And again, it's something that we know, right? If I'm driving to my kid's school, which is 10 minutes away from me, there's like 20 different routes I can take, right? And they all get me to the same destination. Sometimes I take the consistent route. Sometimes we're running late and I have to take the short way, right? Like there's different ways to get there, but we don't embrace our unique way of getting to that goal. It's like we set the goal and then we're trying to figure, well, like, how do I get there? And I'm trying to like consume information that will give me the answer instead of having an exploratory conversation about, well, how do I get there? The way Tracy gets to Cambodia might be completely different. It probably has a stopover in Disney in over there in Shanghai because I've never been there before. And also I love Disney. So like, but then I'd want to take my son. See, the complexity reveals itself. But then I can only deal with the complexity if I use my own version of the story. Otherwise I'm dealing with someone else's complexity. And I think like when you mentioned, Lindsay, that stuff comes up from problems, like, yes, but whose problem? Is that even my problem? Right? Like, is that something I care about from a business perspective? Is that what I'm trying to achieve? Because if I'm not, it's not actually a problem. And I really shouldn't spend time even wondering about it. Just let it go. Okay, I spoke enough. Someone else's turn.
At the end of the day, an organization was born out of solving a problem, a customer's problem, an end user's problem, a society problem, whatever it is, right? So that's again back to purpose. And that bucket list idea for an organization is so impactful because it might even transcend your outlook on a strategic plan. Because you might be trying to do something so massive and so big that the step for this year is so tiny. And I can liken it to my bucket list. I have be a keynote speaker. I don't think that's going to happen in 2025. But I have a couple.
We can probably make that happen.
Well, I'm just not expecting it to. But am I doing little tiny things for 2025 that move in that direction? So I'm looking for just little tiny speaking engagements, right? Just the smallest group, I don't give a rip. That whatever I can do that just moves towards that goal. So we look at an organization. Your bucket list is that purpose, that giant problem that you're trying to solve. What little tiny step am I taking this year as an organization? What even smaller step am I taking as an individual that moves that forward? And that might be the goal for the year. Because some problems, some issues are so big, you can't solve them in a year. Or there's prerequisites, or there's things that you need to do that it might just be, how do I connect all these dots to say, I want to try and get this done in this organization. I'm going to try and get this little step done this year.
I think one thing, go ahead, Caroline.
I was going to say, like, I think, companies do exist to solve a problem for customers. I think that sometimes where owners run into problems, though, is that they solve a problem for customers, but they create an existential problem for their own lives. So, for example, let's take a hypothetical example of, I'm not vegan, but someone starts a vegan catering business because it solved the problem of, corporate clients wanting to get vegan catering. And then that business starts taking over their entire life and starts kind of like looking different than the business and the life you wanted to create. Because I think it's very easy when you're running a business to get, people are influenced by the people around them. So when everyone around you is setting bigger and bigger revenue targets, bigger and bigger, team size, etc., all of those things, that influences you. And you kind of say like, well, that's what I should be doing too. But maybe this caterer is looking for something different out of their life, right? And so that's great that you're still solving that customer's problem, but you've essentially created an even bigger problem that you're no longer living the life that you're wanting to, that you're really intending to live. And I think that's where some internal friction ends up coming up, and that's where you feel torn. And I think that's one of the challenges of like not staying true to what your goals are. Like, yes, you have to meet a very valid need in the marketplace, but you need to be crafting and building the business that's going to serve you and not the other way around.
But maybe you didn't even know that, Carolyn, right? Like, that's the thing. Like, a lot of this stuff, we're figuring it out along the way. It's trial and error. It's, does this shoe fit or does this shoe fit? When you started out, it seems like a great idea to be hyper successful or super successful in fulfilling that need for that market. And I'm sure there's a lot of validation, and there is a massive impact. But if the impact that you're also dealing with is the negative impact of your health and your family and things like that, but this is like where we get to decide, we get to pivot. And that's why goal setting can be pretty massive too annually, whenever you do it, because you have the opportunity to do a bit of a reset. But like having that information, I think Vered said it earlier, like taking information that you've learned from is super important when you bring it to the table. Is, okay, so I've gotten here, what can I do? And is there 5 different ways I can solve this issue for me? Can I still fulfill the need in the market? Do I bring on a partner? To in order to sustain that? Is it about niching down and having a smaller business and having a higher touch point to customers, if that's what makes you happy? Whatever it is, I mean, I'm just throwing out ideas, but the key is you're informed by what's going on, and really looking internally to what works for you. Because one thing you said, is that, and I had a coffee with someone yesterday, we were chatting about this, like, it's great to have external influences in a way of, we don't need to reinvent every wheel, but you still have to take that influence and that, information that you've gathered and then put it through your own filter of what's important to you. I bet that's why a lot of goals even fail, because they get caught up in chasing what others are chasing. So maybe that's one thing where we should start. Like, whose goal is this? Is this your goal?
Challenge that with just like when we've talked about clarity before and really like organizational purpose. And I feel like that's sort of an indicator. If it's gone too far in the direction of growing in the way that you did not intend, like maybe you have to rein it back and go, well, what is the real reason that I started this business? Like, what am I actually trying to accomplish? Because it's not based on revenue. It's not based on, potentially growing this big organization. There's something fundamentally more purposeful around it. And so I'm just going to kind of like challenge that. Like when entrepreneurs get to that point of potentially being burnt out or feeling like it's taken over their lives, going back to, well, why did I do this?
Well, I think people are really good at like creating that narrative as well, and justifying and kind of saying, okay, well, it's only going to be 6 more months or 9 more months or 1 year, and then I'm going to arrive at this Shangri-La spot. And going back to the data-driven goals that use real data, that use real metrics, that use real KPIs, to tell the real story versus what they're feeling at that exact time, which it is a roller coaster, right? It is ups and downs and sideways and forwards. And, one of the challenges that I have with some of these goals, especially at a moment in time, is it's a moment in time, and whatever people are feeling at that time, you usually color those goals. And I think that the ability to, first of all, look backwards, to Tim's point, use some of the data that says, okay, well, like, what's our actual success criteria in hitting the goals? Like, is this an actual productive activity, or do we need to redefine it? And then being able to say, okay, how are we going to measure and set these goals going forward, that aligns with that purpose, I think is really important, because otherwise it's just going to be a little bit of a roller coaster.
Well, and I think too, I mean, I'm in marketing, so narrative is kind of my thing, right? And the narrative about starting a business is you work your ass off, right?
Mhm.
You work all the time, you get burned out. That's the story that people buy into. And if we allow ourselves to buy into that story, then our behavior is going to match the story that we believe. And it's something that I like continue to try and break in the market, is that it's still very common. And you still see these people, I worked 80 hours. I had an organization that I volunteer for, and the executive director was asked to create a job description for himself so that he could be replaced. And it was based on him working 80 hours a week. I was like, dude, this is like, no, one, are we going to actually go to market and be like, we're going to hire you? And the expectation is that you're going to work 80 hours a week? No, right? But we do that because we think that's what it takes to build a business. And so we actually end up filling our time with stuff that doesn't directly contribute to building the business whatsoever, but we externally think now that we've met the protocol, right? I'm doing what it takes. I'm spending 80 hours. Like, what if? And I was like, I shared this in like our internal chat here because I have the question I always come back to is how can we? Like, how can we do something? If we're really clear on what we want to do, then we can ask the question, how can we do that? And it can be like a really cool mashup of multiple things that we want to do simultaneously. I always think about this from a political perspective, right? Like, can't we talk about saving the environment and invest in oil and gas? Like, I'm pretty sure there's a way where we can do both of these things. But if we're not asking how can we, then we're not going to figure out a way to do it. And if I go and I'm like, okay, I want to grow by 2 times this year. What am I supposed to do? Right? Okay, world, tell me what I need to do in order to grow 2 times this year. You have never grown 2 times ever. So I'm not saying, again, like the information is bad to know, but at the end of the day, we're creating something new. You are going to heights that you have not reached before. We are now in the zone of mastering uncertainty. And the only way that I can set myself up for success to do those things is to set myself up for success as an individual human, which looks different. Like the way I set myself up for success looks differently than the way all of you guys set yourself up for success, all the way all of our listeners set themselves up for success. But we have to, all those answers are in us. They're not from outside. And if we're not spending any time figuring out what we would do, then I mean, our time is going to be monopolized by everyone else. We should.
One thing you said, Tracy, that I love, I have it as like a descriptor under one of my core values around mindset is, you know, you said, can we? And then we said, how can we? Right? So you start with the can we, and that's belief. And then it's like, okay, so now you get past that hurdle and it's like, how can we do this? So this pulls kind of back to what Carolyn was speaking about earlier, and even Keith's comment about the 80 hours. A lot of goals do fail because there's that blind faith into the can we, and then not the breakdown to the how, right? So, you know, individuals or companies aren't going to hit goals if they just pile stuff on, right? As far as like, all of a sudden you're going to be an 80-hour work week. Again, a whole bunch of you trying to achieve it. And that's why a lot of goals do fail, because like Carolyn said, you go to your quarterly meeting, you come back, you're all excited. It's always the end of the week, of course. And then you come into work Monday morning and the lineup is out your door. Your phone is ringing, you have your stuff, and then you're like, okay, so this is next week, and this is next week, and this is next week. And you do that for a period of time. And certain systems, like I'm familiar with EOS, you have a weekly cadence, and it's like, are you on track, off track? That was always the biggest discussion for us. Are you on track or off track? Well, I haven't started. President would say, well, you still have time. It's like, well, but I've done nothing, right? Have I broken it down? So the how, and maybe that's what we can kind of talk a little bit more, because capacity is super important. And this individual that I was working with, the fact that she, use the word focus and discipline is like awesome. Okay, so like what can we push away or postpone, delegate, delete, whatever, in order to start working on this is super important because it's an opportunity to reset and restart.
Yeah. Tim, I bet you have some thoughts on it, but just as you're saying it, I think it's exactly what Tracy was saying. Like, can we do this? How can we do this? But there's a third question of like, who can help with it? And I was like, I think we got to look at that one. But Tim, I'm betting that you have a lot of thoughts on everything Lindsay was just mentioning too.
Well, and who can help with this? That's a great addition to what I was going to say. But I think it starts with what's in the way. And so what you just said, Lindsay, you come back on Monday, there's a lineup out your door, the phone is ringing. Like, what is in your way? And what are you doing to get rid of that? So that's an important part of goal setting is what are we not going to do? And so the whole start, stop, continue process is something that we each individually should do, as well as the organization, to say, what are we not going to do so that we can accomplish this thing that we haven't accomplished before? And I think that's a very important part of that reflection and that goal setting is take some space to put that in a ledger and just say, these are the things we're not going to do. We're going to choose to do things differently so that we can do that. Then through that exercise, you might come back to what Carolyn said of who can help. And so some of those outside influences you were talking about a minute ago, Tracy, we all set ourselves up differently. I'll listen to anybody's ideas and how they set them up for success. I might not take any of it. I might take one thing. I might take something, but it needs to be something that works for me, for the organization, whatever it is, right? So I like to listen to those ideas, but there's a huge filter in there of what makes sense for me and my organization. And so the who can help, there's certain people I listen to a lot more than others. As they resonate a bit more with me in the organizations I work with.
And you can't necessarily identify who those people are unless you listen to people, right? Like I like to call it trying on ideas. Go and listen to somebody. Like that idea, great. Listen to them more. If you don't like that idea, that's okay. Like there's no, and I mean, actually, I would love to like briefly touch on this point because I feel like from a fractional point of view, very often we are seen as like the expert in an area. And like, there's a lot of times where even clients of mine will be like, well, you're the expert. You need to tell us what to do. I'm like, dude, I'm not you though, right? So we need to have a conversation about what you would do, mash it up with my expertise in the market, and then we can come up with something that you would do. But I can't just remember having this conversation with a client about Instagram. And they were like, we have to be on Instagram. And I'm like, do you? Because you can be on Instagram. I'm not saying you can't be on Instagram, but do you like being on Instagram? Does it feel fun for you to show up there? Do you like starting conversations there? Do you feel like it builds your brand in the way that you would build your brand? And the answer was no to all of those questions. Like, why would I present to you an Instagram strategy? It's not aligned with your business. And there's lots of businesses who use only Instagram and do a good business, right? So it's not necessarily, I think a lot of times people use fractional resources as an out to thinking about like, what would I do? And I actually think that a really good fractional resource will get you back into that conversation and use their expertise to like coach and frame the conversation and the to-dos and the hows that are associated with that. But at the end of the day, this still has to do, you have to participate.
Absolutely. If there's no desire to change, it's not going to happen, right? So yes, there's one thing around awareness, and you think of the card I always like to use on change management, behavioral change management. And, great, you're giving them some awareness that there's an issue there. But if they don't have that desire to change, that's where it stops.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, a fractional resource isn't going to come in and be able to like change the flow of the river.
Yes.
We all have to flow together. And if we're not going to flow together, then we're not really going anywhere.
And we can help and support strategy setting and goal setting, but ultimately it lies on the leadership team because it needs to feel right for them and their business.
Mhm.
Hey, Tracy, can we just give a shout out to Islam's
yeah.
comment there? He just,
Islam's wishing everyone a happy new year, and he's very happy to see Tim's screen in the right direction.
so if you're just tuning in, I had
Aren't we all?
some technical difficulties the last couple episodes where I just turned 90 degrees. But I wanted to bring that up because it's also about tools, right? And so when you have a problem, what tools do we need to change? Are they serving me? Obviously, what I was doing the last couple episodes wasn't serving me. So
Well, it was because it gave us a good out to talk about changing perspectives.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. But thanks to Lindsay, I was just inspired to go change the tools, right? So let's figure out what this is. And in this case, it's a very easy one to do because I just go get a USB camera, I plug it in, now I'm set up, right? But sometimes tools are a bit more complicated to change, and you need to look out a bit further in what that is. But that's part of, I think, looking at your goals and your success. Who do I need? What do I need? Do I need to change the way that I'm doing some things so that I can get some of those things out of the way? So you might have a goal to do X, but before I do that, I need to change the way we serve customers because we're not able to do that. So I need to spend some time this year on restructuring so that I can do that and then go on to that next goal the next year. So these things are going to be all linked and intertwined.
Yeah. First of all, 100 points for your creativity on the transition there. I feel like that was fantastic. I agree with you. I feel like the tools, and I'm curious on Carolyn's perspective on this, kind of fit in alongside the who, right? It's like once you decide, the personal elements that are driving, you set these organizational goals and you start to think about the how and the who. They kind of all become more focused on the execution and kind of that validity of how do you actually bring these to life? What are the milestones and marching orders that you kind of have versus, I guess, setting those themselves? Like, what do you think, Carolyn? I know you were talking about the who earlier as well.
Yeah, the who, but like on the tools, I think fundamentally, like even just thinking not specifically what tool or what specific method you would use, but is like we in finance, we actually end up defining a budget is just putting dollars attached to what your goals are. So even if your goals are very purpose driven, even if you're a not-for-profit, fundamentally your goals are reflecting where you're intending to have your staff focus their time and effort towards what objectives, where you're intending to make different investments. So I'm kind of curious what I've noticed at least is that a lot of companies set goals and they do it completely disassociated from their financial planning process. So they'll have someone in accounting, someone in finance, work in a spreadsheet, come up with what the budget is for the coming year. And it's totally disjointed from maybe the vision or the goals or kind of what you're thinking about or contemplating doing. And I think regardless of what tool you end up using, merging the two together is what helps to kind of have that execution not fall apart so that you do that strategy session. And then out of that strategy session, whatever it is that you choose as your ultimate goals, you are really attaching dollars associated with it, right? You're breaking it down into, you know what, when we go after this type of the market, this is the customers we're going to bring in. When we're making these capital investments, here's the dollars and where it's going to happen. When we're shifting the focus of our staff away from doing this towards doing that, like you're putting the dollars associated to your plan, and then it gives you a mechanism to hold yourself accountable throughout the remaining of the year, like the remainder of the year and years to come. But in practice, I think a lot of companies don't always do that. What have you guys found? Like, do you see that really well connected? What have you guys, like the theory tells you that's what you need to do, but what people do in practice oftentimes is disconnected. What do you guys think? What have you guys seen?
I'd love to just call in
Sorry.
Shannon's comment here too about how the biggest hidden driver of culture is where the money's located. So I'm sure Sharon was going to touch on that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that comment and I completely agree. I think that is so critical, especially for those leaders that feel like they're drowning in their business is investing in those mechanisms to support realignment of their team, making sure that they have the right people in the right seats, and really investing in that talent strategy early on is really critical to help really live out those goals of what they have for their organization and their vision and their purpose. But I wanted to say that where I see things falling short too, just to piggyback on Carolyn's comment, was I completely agree. And I think organizations typically will have, their business plan, not always attached to this long-term beacon or North Star or their goal. And then they'll go straight into budget and not really thinking about like, what are the things that I need to do to actually create this world that I want to be in. So it becomes a little bit disjointed and disconnected. And I think there aren't a lot of organizations that do it very well in terms of like thinking about those activities that will create the world that you want, and then moving into what does that budget look like and is it realistic?
I think accountability, I was going to say accountability back to budget, right? So it's not a one and done type of scenario with annual budgets. In my experience, you do the annual budget and it's based on goals, but you still have to be informed on where you came from. So some of your early year spends, to try to reach towards these goals, maybe less aggressive in order to just like ensure that some of like the revenue targets and the things that are coming in can support those bigger picture goals, right? Just a thought. I think it is in my experience, I've had budgets in the past for like equipment spending and things for the year. It's not super easy to take that, $20,000 and divide it up between 12 and say, oh, I have this much each month. Like, your budget is going to be very fluid as conditions change, so monthly financial meetings are super important to just like circle back to as far as an accountability of where you are at from like a revenue and also like a cost perspective. So, and
yeah, exactly. And the numbers don't lie. I think exactly what Shannon was mentioning there is like people believe where you actually put the dollars. So you got to be so careful not to just be hypocritical and say, people are our most important asset and we're really focused on like leveling up our talent. And then you look and you're kind of like, okay, tell me like, where's your training and development budget? And it's like, oh, well, it's just like shrank compared to last year. And it's like, all right, so we know what your real priorities are, right? So the numbers, like the money has to be connected with what you actually say your priorities are.
But I also think and I don't know if this is similar in the other departments, but it seems very apparent to me from a marketing perspective, is that like very commonly marketing will be allocated a percentage of the annual revenue. And so we say like, hey, marketing, you got $300,000 for the year. And I'm like, okay, it's going to cost this much to go to this trade show and this much to go to this trade show. And you break it up and you put it into your buckets. But then there's still like a missing piece there in terms of, yes, I could use that money to go to a trade show, but then how am I using my presence at that trade show to deliver on my goal? Because very commonly, again, what's happening, we get distracted by the process of shipping the booth to Vegas. And then we got to get 3 salespeople out there. And then I get distracted by trying to find the best flights and trying to find the cheapest hotel. And I get I'm managing the budget. But then I stopped managing the goals. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that and again, I think a lot of this is intention. Lindsay, you used that word earlier, right? It's just about making sure that we're actually standing for our goals, that we're going to say, okay, well, if we are going to use a trade show to accomplish this goal, how are we going to use a trade show to accomplish the goal? Because just by showing up is probably not going to do it. So how are we going to use it? And very simple, like this is just very common in marketing, right? People use the budget to show up, but like just because you showed up at the party doesn't mean anybody knew you were at the party, guys. So like, how are we making ourselves known? How is that related to our goal? Is our goal about awareness? Is our goal about brand reputation? Like, what are some of these things that we can contribute to from a marketing perspective? But I can't just by default contribute to them by having a budget. I need to do the meaningful things with that budget.
I want to build on the word that you mentioned too around contribution as well. Because I feel, and I'm curious if you've all seen this, but in a lot of organizations, as they start to grow, as they get more and more defined departments, whether it be marketing, technology, HR, finance, etc., they all of a sudden have their own goals, and I think that sometimes they'll drift away from any sort of central connection. And so marketing might have incredibly strong goals, and you might have a really strong purpose, and the whole team understands you're ready to execute, but Tim and maybe the sales group has a very different set of goals, and because there's no strong organizational goals that connect everything together, people might be marching to their own beat, but they don't collaborate with each other. And so you might be going to a trade show and have that in your budget, and then on the sales side, Tim has something very different planned. And I think
and then I'm like, Tim, but I got all these leads from the trade show. Now your sales team has to work.
Yeah, he said, but we don't want to work in Omaha, like I think that that connection is a piece, especially as organizations grow, that really falls down, where everyone seems to have their own goals, but there's no strong connecting goals across the organization.
That's so important, Keith, and the whole trade show thing, Tracy. We could do a whole episode and maybe on crazy, stupid marketing on trade show strategy. But it's back to what Carolyn said. Who do you need to accomplish this goal, right? If our goal is to raise awareness and to have a trade show presence, who do I need there? I need salespeople there. Well, I need to let them know. Not, hey, I got a trade show next week. Can you send a couple sales guys to go to the trade show and man the booth? That is, I want to swear, that is a waste of time.
Well, you said it, man the booth. I mean, you don't need a sales guy to man the booth.
Yeah, like, well, but even like, right. This is, I'm going to just, I want to just riff on this for a second because like, I have many, I will do an entire show on my show about trade shows, but like, I had a friend of mine, she got invited to a trade show and she was like, can I pick your brain about trade shows? And I'm like, yep. And we were having this conversation. She's asking me like, what commonly would people do at a trade show? And I'm like, well, commonly people will have a booth. They will have a nice table topper for that booth. They will have swag on their booth. They will have an AV TV where they are on a loop playing some kind of boring video about their organization that they paid thousands of dollars to produce. And they'll have salespeople at the booth who are trying to start conversations with mostly people who are not interested in having a conversation with them. This is generally what will happen at a trade show. What most of us have consumed at a trade show. And so I asked her, I'm like, is that what you would do? She's like, no. And I'm like, okay, great. What would you do? How would you start conversations with people? And she's like, well, I would get them a coffee and then would sit in a comfy chair and have a conversation. And I'm like, okay, so what is actually possible at a trade show is, because there's power, right? So you bring your little Keurig machine, right? Some coffee pods. You make people a cup of coffee. You get 2 comfy chairs and you sit and you have a conversation. It's totally available for you at a trade show. That's not what the trade show team is going to try and sell you, because they're trying to upgrade you to like all of the things. But like, if you know the experience you're trying to create, you can actually go and create that. And it's probably actually cheaper than what most people are spending on a trade show. And so like, again, this is the thing. And Islam has a really great, it's not going to show all of the comments because it's very long, but the concept is about aligning sales, marketing, and finance, right? Like, we all have a very clear idea of what I'm doing with this budget and how it contributes to the organization. So then when marketing goes to a trade show, sales and like, oh, stupid marketing doing a stupid trade show. No, we know as a holistic team how this is contributing to the organization, or at least how we see it contributing. And maybe it will, maybe it won't, but we can at least then assess it based on that and say like, hey, no, this didn't deliver on our goal. And I, as a marketer, can also say, hey, no, this didn't deliver on our goal. Let's not just keep going to trade shows and doing the whole thing over and over and over again. Let's like stop and review and maybe come up with something new that other people aren't doing that might work better for us.
I think diverse perspectives, right? Like bringing people together to have that conversation in advance, like taking those goals and how do you break them down? right? Like you're all in it together. That's the thing. Yes, the visionary, the CEO can have that North Star and that, that idea, but then coming back and having those conversations as a team, breaking down the silos, everyone's at the table. And then as a result, the marketing team going back and having the discussion, and the sales team, and like myself in operations, when I was deciding how to spend that however many $1,000s on tools, I didn't just go to, the like Home Depot and just pick the tools on sale. I guess unless it was like cutting budget, but I needed to speak to the shop team and say, okay, so if our goal is to get these projects to the customers quicker, and that is like our goal for the year as it's gone through all the way up to the top, but that's how it sits in like the manufacturing team. It's like, what tools should we be purchasing with that intention in mind, right? So that conversation starts at the top, but it continues to be happening all the way down. And that's how you have ownership in the outcome, right? Don't go down there and you tell them, you talk to them, you have a conversation, all the way down.
Well, and I think I do want to, because I want to wrap this up by bringing it back to like the value that a fractional resource can potentially provide to an organization. Because again, I think a lot of times, because a fractional resource is generally focused on a single department, which is like we're demonstrating that here today. One of the other things is that they're also looking at the business from a strategic perspective, right? So they have, while they might not be an expert. I always say this about finance, right? Like finance is about as far away from expertise as I have. But like what I know is that these things are supposed to be connected, right? So there's probing questions that will identify gaps where those things don't happen. And it's very likely that a fractional resource that comes on board from any individual department is going to identify gaps between the departments and opportunities in those strategic level conversations for more of those brains to come together and have a group conversation instead of just, I mean, we talked about it in one of our earlier episodes of being like, this is an HR problem, and Barry, just go fix the HR problem. Don't bother us with any of the details until it's fixed. Okay, but like, there's marketers who are employees as part of there's a sales team, there's the like process, like all of these people are employees. This isn't really like a single issue. And so I just wanted to like remind people of that, because I do also think, like mentioned earlier in the show, that people will be like, oh, I'm going to hire like fractional sales, and Tim is going to go and just talk to the salespeople and figure out what's wrong with sales, and like have this one connection point back into the organization that's now fixed. That one of the benefits of having a fractional resource is that they know that that's not how it works, and they will be able to identify the multiple plug-in points or break points where those things are happening, which is probably because they're being treated like silos. And there's opportunities to not treat them like silos. Does anyone else want to speak to that while we have like 1 minute left?
Outside perspective brings that as well, right? Because we're all having conversations about this being issues that we've experienced while being within organizations, as issues we experience while now working alongside organizations, depending on like how embedded you are as a fractional leader. But it is a hot topic. And when you're in it, there's the expression, you can't see the forest for the trees, right? Like you're just buried in it. You have a hard time, even knowing what to focus on. But bringing that outside perspective, it's quite remarkable how quickly, just by asking some targeted questions to different individuals and taking that time, and you might not have time to do that, right? You may be operating at a 110% capacity already. So bringing an outside perspective to the table is they bring their expertise and their capacity, like their time to do that. So it's an investment.
Yeah. And I think like there's some great things happening in the comments. We've got Sridith hopefully I said that correctly or close to correctly, talking about how finance is an important role. Scott Wilson is also a fractional VP of sales, talking about like the sales, but also like the bigger picture. And a lot of us have worked in the bigger picture, but also most importantly, I do feel like there is a level of curiosity that happens with very strong fractional people that just allows them to see the gaps, right? So again, while it might not be my area of expertise, you can identify that this is like, hey, maybe there's like something we need to align here. And one of the things I know about like all of us is we're just like, if you go back and watch any of the other episodes, we're always talking about clarity, alignment, purpose, right? Like this is where we live in terms of how we think, how we see things. And this very common for fractional resources, something you'd want to like pressure test in a conversation with them. But this type of thinking can allow you to continually get pulled back to that strategic level. If, Lindsay, like you were saying, you find yourself getting pulled into the day-to-day and you can't see the forest for the trees anymore, there has to be somebody in your organization who's looking at the forest. Right? Ideally, it's the leader. As the leader, especially in a growing business, it's very easy to get sucked into day-to-day putting out fires. So who is helping you rise above that? It's a really great opportunity to look at a fractional resource and whether or not they can provide that type of support for you. We are totally over on time, so I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you. We had like the chat was blowing up today. Thank you so much, Islam. Chris was in there, Shannon, Sridith, and Scott. Thank you for sharing your point of views. It makes the conversation much more robust. So we really appreciate you guys taking the time to make very meaningful comments for the show. I didn't get to cover all of them. So if you're watching this on replay or you're watching this on your platform of choice, just take a little quick scroll through. I think these are mostly on LinkedIn. LinkedIn will be the best place to find all of the comments. And read them all. There's lots of great stuff that we didn't actually get to call into the show as well. Keith, Darren, Carolyn, Lindsay, Tim, as always, such pleasure having a conversation with you guys. You guys should have seen the conversations we were having, and we went out for beers. And it was like legit. Next time we should do that. We should just record it because it's also so much, all the good stuff. But come back. The Fractional Forum is here having these types of conversations weekly. What are we at? 9 a.m. Mountain Time, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. Use a time calculator if you're in not one of those time zones. We would love to see you. And if you are a fractional or if you are a CEO and you have something you would like to deep dive, reach out to one of us. If you'd like to share your experience and your expertise on the show, we would love to have you. So reach out, let us know as we continue to try on new things for the year that help make the Fractional Forum as helpful for everybody as it can be. LinkedIn user, thank you. I'm not sure who that is, but we're glad that you thought the show was great. Thank you for tuning in.